Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to Jefferson Community College on this beautiful night. Thank you for being here. I want to start by thanking the sponsors, Jefferson Community College Center for Community Studies, Assemblymember Gray's office, Nuclear New York, and I also want to provide a thank you to Clarkson University, who will be hosting a similar forum tomorrow evening. We're glad to have representatives from NYSERDA here, and I want to start off by providing a big thank you to the director of our center, Joel Alone, won those surveys that you all get via phone, text, email. Those all come from our Center for Community Studies, and Joel is our director there. We also have Andy sitting here in front of me, and he'll be asking all the questions. So I want to say thank you. And so now I'm going to call up our moderator, Joel Alone, to start off this evening. So thank you all.
Thank you very much, Dan, and I also would like to echo his sentiments and welcome all of you here to Jefferson Community College. I'd like to do a little bit of housekeeping at the beginning so that you all know. I think as you walked in, it was explained to you the process of submitting questions and how we're going to handle this evening, but I still wanted to review it briefly. Dr. Dupree did his remarks. I'm going to take about 10 minutes or so and show some of our hot off the press, just finished yesterday actually, public opinion research that we've completed. And then probably the largest portion of this evening is going to be, we have 4 experts who are going to be here and each do a presentation on various aspects of nuclear energy and its role in the the energy future of New York State. And then we hope, I know we started a little bit late, so this might be a stretch, but we really hope that we can spend a full hour on questions and answers. And as you would know, hopefully, there are 3 different ways that folks were allowed to submit questions. One of them was during the online pre-registration process, and we have a whole, Andy has it up front here, all of them live that have been submitted online. So we have a group of questions to ask from there, but our thought is after you hear the presentations from these 4 gentlemen, you'll be inspired to have other questions. And so there is the Slido app that's on the program. That QR code that's up there is on the program in front of you. Or if you prefer not to use a smartphone and do it that way, the bottom of the program, you can tear it off or write your question on there, raise your hand, and Andy or myself will come and retrieve the question from you. And we will intend to answer as many questions as we can during that hour, and we've been assured by all the experts any other questions that we don't get to will eventually be, every one of them, answered via email. I can't think of anything else other than I'd like to jump right into what we're really proud and love to do at Jefferson Community College. For 26 years, we have had a Center for Community Studies, and I see Dr. John Dean sitting back there, who was our president in 1999. Who it was his thought, his creation, the Center for Community Studies. And I've been fortunate enough to work there throughout the last 2+ decades. From day one, we had this as our mission, and hopefully it guides us in what we do at the center. And you'll notice the 2 bolded items. The 2 things that we try to do are do community-based research, and we also try to provide a forum for discussion of ideas of importance. And we believe that tonight is where those 2 different goals really do converge. We have recent research on these topics, and then we have experts to help inform us and educate us about these topics. So there's a little bit more detail about the 2 things that we do. We have our public forums that recently we've had some on epidemiology and some celebrating our 25th anniversary that were the 2024 election, and this one is about nuclear energy, the new technology. And our surveys, I've had several of you already this evening say to me, do you really randomly sample? I keep getting hit with text messages for you, and I assure you we do randomly sample. So those are the 2 things that we're about. Recently, what we've done is in the end of October, we did our normal omnibus study that we do each October, where we have about 25 or 30 quality of life indicators that we longitudinally track. But each year, we always offer the opportunity to community-based groups and individuals to add some other component questions. And this year that came from the nuclear energy sector. So we have rich data on our 4 local counties. After we collected it at the end of the October, we looked at our capacity and timing, and we knew we had an opportunity to frame these local data better. So we fielded a study that we hit every one of the 62 counties in New York State. So I will be sharing with you in the next 5 or 6 slides. We only have 4 survey questions, so I'm not going to be up here for a half an hour, but I'm going to share for you the results with these 4 questions. Locally, the maroon, cranberry-colored ones. If you look left to right, what you see is, the question was, have you heard anything at all about advanced nuclear energy generation plants? These are our 4 local counties, and you can see the St. Lawrence County folks are the most likely to say, I've heard of it. And then next to it, over here, there's the regional average of our 4 counties. This is the statewide average. Take away from that slide, about half of the folks say, I've heard of it, half say they haven't. But when you take the entire state, it becomes a lesser rate of familiarity. Next slide the next set of questions went to concerns. Please notice there are 4 typical concerns that we measured. Impact on long-term electricity rates, a concern. Handling of spent fuel, a concern. I'm sure the experts tonight, this is their playbook of things to talk about and educate the folks on. Safety for local residents, dependability of the power supply. Again, what do I see as a statistician out of this clearly? There's a lot of consistency amongst our 4 North Country counties when you look at the impact on long-term electricity rates. And it's very similar in the blue one, 64% of the folks in the entire state, including Long Island, the 5 boroughs, the lower Hudson Valley, Western New York. We hit all of them. 64% indicated they are either very or somewhat concerned with that. You will notice I constructed this graph going left to right as largest concern to least concern, and it comes out of there quite loud and clear that pocketbook issues of the cost of electricity are of concern here and throughout the state. But look at the blue bars on the last 3 sets of stacks. You can see the issues of handling of spent fuel, safety for local residents, and dependability. There's clearly a higher rate of concern when you look at the entire snapshot of the state rather than the snapshot of our 4 counties around here. We transition from concerns to some other aspects or considerations that one might think of when they're thinking about, do I support or oppose, or what are my feelings about nuclear energy? And if you can't read it in the back, affordability, again, of electricity was one of them. Preservation of open agricultural land. What did we ask? Is it perceived importance? Is it extremely important to you? Is it very important? Is it somewhat important? Is it not that important? Is it not at all important? What I captured was the extremely and very together for you. Again, left to right, you can see these are the factors in decreasing levels of importance perceived by participants. 90% of the folks, whether you're up here or down throughout the entire state, very consistently, 9 out of 10 say that that pocketbook issue of cost of electricity is extremely or very important to them. You see consistency amongst our counties for the most part. Lewis County a little bit lower in their concerns for a couple. But the largest thing that I see that's a variation on that graph is the last bar that looks at reducing emissions, and on a statewide basis, that's perceived as more important than necessarily around here, but still it's the least of the 5. And finally, and I would argue the most important question that I believe we asked as public opinion researchers, is we asked, would you like to learn more? Hence the connection with tonight's program. So this is the exact phrasing of the question. Which of the following best reflects your opinion about advanced nuclear energy generation power plants? And folks were given 3 choices. Do you feel that you know enough to confidently decide that you support developing them? And the way the question was fielded up here was in the North Country. Well, that doesn't work in Oswego County. So there it said in Oswego County. And throughout the rest of the state, it was fielded as in the region that includes your county. 3 choices. I know enough that I support. I know enough that I oppose. I really think I need to learn more before I decide. And what jumped out at us as researchers on this one was clearly the largest response, the plurality was, I'd like to learn more. And when we saw that 61% amongst our 4 counties, and we decided to field it statewide, very similar. That blue and gray is not a statistically significant difference. And by the way, the sample size statewide was just shy of 1,000 participants. The sample size in our 4 counties, we try to target because it's our omnibus, 500 per county. We had about 2,100 participants. But also, kind of finally here, amongst that 40% locally who says, I know enough that I have an opinion about it, The gray bar shows our 4 counties merged. 32% say I support, 8% say that I oppose. And when you look at the blue bars, statewide, that intensity is not quite as high. It's 23% support versus, 12% oppose. And I finished, just for those of you that want to go to our website and click on it, and maybe learn more, or maybe send me an email, or maybe swing by the office here. We go much deeper. This is a very quick, knowing my role, that we have the experts in science sitting there, and I'm trying to tether it together with public opinion. We have the public here showing interest in important topics. I finished with just showing you we can dig and do dig deeper. So that's a cross-tabulation table. And again, those of you in the back may not be able to see it. I picked the one that was how important is affordability of electricity. This is what jumps out at me and hopefully jumps out at you. And that is, if you go across every county in the North Country, each gender, the age groups, the education levels, the income levels, it stays right around 60%, independent of how you slice, dice. The ubiquity of this response set is quite telling. So that's the question on the pocketbook issue. And I finish with this, and I really apologize to those of you in the back, because this is a graph that I had to use the top half. That's the same type of thing of our key question. Which of the following best reflects your opinion? And what I'd like you to notice is that I go down this graph through genders, ages, educations, political ideologies, political party affiliation, military in the household. You can see the gray bar is biggest in each group. In each group that was providing evidence to us that folks are interested in learning more. And if you really did dig deeper, you can start to look at the maroon versus pink for the ratio of support versus oppose and all those subgroups. And I finish, I haven't heard the ding, ding, ding yet, Scott. Have I gone way long? I'm still okay? For more information, I'm Joel Lalone again. Our format is first initial, last name, jlalone at sunyjefferson.edu. This is Andy Draper, who works with me. And Larry Danforth is in class right now, so he hasn't made it here yet that I haven't seen Larry. And that's our website, and all of the press release and the crosstabs and the analysis of these questions have already been posted. And at this point, I'd like to hand it over to the first of our panelists, who is Mr. Keith Shue from Nuclear New York, and he has a PowerPoint presentation that Andy will be facilitating here. So if you have questions for me, it would be during the Q&A part. Who knows, you might have some for me. Probably not, but you may. Thank you.
Gee, that light's bright. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here, and I just want to start by saying thank you to Senator Gray for inviting the public to be part of this conversation. It's a great conversation to have. We're excited. Let me tell you a little bit about who we are. Nuclear New York, we're an organization that's, we have people from all walks of life. We have engineers, we have scientists, we have environmentalists, business people, people who are fighters for social justice, and we're folks from all sides of the political spectrum, you know, far left, far right, people in the middle, which I consider myself one of those. But one thing we share in common is that we recognize that if we're going to be building a society that's going to meet the needs of people, at the same time where we're trying to protect the environment, we're trying to be sensitive to Mother Nature, then we need a diversity of solutions, and nuclear power needs to be part of that. So that's kind of where we're at. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm an electrical engineer. I got a degree in Virginia, and I worked in the industry for quite a while. But I'm also a pretty hardcore environmentalist. When I was younger, I was quite involved in groups like Sierra Club and Audubon and things like that. And I was, very concerned about protecting land, protecting nature, protecting wildlife and habitat. It's part of the reason I support nuclear power, and I'll get to that a little bit. But I think basically we all want the same thing. We all want clean air. We want clean water. We want to protect the environment. And when I say that, I'm not just talking about climate, you know, the 1 or 2 degrees Celsius. I'm talking about protecting nature. We want to do that. We want reliable energy. We want a vibrant economy, good jobs made here with products being made here in America, an energy system that's secure, and a nation that is secure. So today, I think all of us are going to be talking about how nuclear relates to each one of those topics. I should be advancing this, shouldn't I? Everything I just said is associated with that picture right there. So let's talk about what nuclear is, Nuclear 101. So very, 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 very simple. What is a nuclear power plant? A nuclear power plant is a fossil fuel power plant without the fossil fuels. And why do I say that? Because you have a heat source, right? And that heat source runs a steam turbine, which then produces electricity. That's what happens in a nuclear power plant. That's what happens in a fossil fuel plant. The difference is, in a fossil fuel plant, you're burning something. You're burning fossil fuels, and you're creating pollutants. You're creating carbon dioxide. But you're creating other things too, sulfur oxides, nitrous oxides. You're creating particulate matter. If it's coal, mercury, and things like that are things to be concerned about. With a nuclear power plant, you don't do that. We're splitting atoms, okay? And when we split atoms, the stuff that's left over, we don't put that up in the air. We save it, okay? That's an important thing. And we'll talk some more about that. But, you know, we have some great facilities here in New York. Gannett, Fitzpatrick, 9 Mile Point, these are the workhorses that have provided a large chunk of our carbon-free electricity in New York for decades. And they still have some good life in them. I think you're going to see their licenses renewed, and you're going to see them operating well into the future, as they should. But, you know, what we're talking about tonight is the new stuff, right? If we're going to provide for the energy needs of society, we got to think about how to, about these other nuclear options as well. And there's a whole plethora of technologies here, Generation 3+, which is variations of our existing technologies, and Generation 4 reactors, more exotic type of technologies, different moderators, different coolants, different fuels, different fuel assemblies. And I think Joseph is probably going to go a lot into some of this stuff. But this just gives you a little idea of some of the diversity of nuclear solutions that are out there. They come in all different sizes, okay? Large reactors like the ones we got today. Small modular reactors, those are facilities, those are reactors where the large piece parts come in on big trucks, and then they're modules, and you put them together on the site. And then you have microreactors, the smaller reactors. You can bring the whole reactor in on a truck. And so all of these things are potentially at play as we're talking about the future of New York. So I'm going to talk to you about why we're for nuclear energy. I'm going to talk to you about it from the standpoint of me as an engineer, also me as an environmentalist. So as an engineer, we need it. We need it because if you look at our demand curve, basically electricity demand, you're seeing that here. A lot of it is baseload. A lot of our electricity demand is demand that's just there all the time. We need electricity all the time. There's floating on top of that, but we have a large chunk of baseload demand. And so you need a source of electricity that can do that. So there's something called capacity factor. Not all megawatts are created equal. A megawatt of solar is not going to give you the same amount of energy over time as a megawatt of nuclear power. The sun doesn't shine all the time. And you can kind of see the comparisons here when you're looking at different sources of energy. So the other problem with this, and again, I don't want to trash renewables because I think renewables are part of the equation. Let me just say that right off the bat. But the reality is we have to look at the limitations of different sources of energy. And if you have a source of energy that is intermittent, only there for a small fraction of the time, then you need to have storage to move the electricity from when you're getting it to when you need it, and you have to have more of it to start with to make up the difference. So what you end up doing is you're climbing this asymptotic curve. If you try to do it all with intermittent sources, wind, solar, and batteries, you run into problems. The costs, the difficulties, the logistics of actually making it work become much more difficult, and you don't actually get there. You end up finding that you need backup generation anyway. So, that's why you need nuclear power. Nuclear power is abundant, reliable energy all the time. Again, abundant energy. Micron's coming to town, right? They're going to have as much energy demand as, I think they say that the combined demand of New Hampshire and Vermont is going to be the electricity demand for Micron. It's phenomenal. Nuclear power can deliver that reliable, always-on electricity. And with abundant electricity, you can do a lot of abundant good that's even beyond electricity generation. You can not only make electricity, you can use the heat for industrial processes. You can combine the heat with the electricity to make hydrogen, synthetic fuels, seawater desalinization. A lot of great things can be done. District heating is a possibility. They're doing it in Europe right now with nuclear waste heat. Medical isotopes. This is an interesting thing. A lot of people's lives are being saved right now because there are nuclear power plants, particularly the CANDU reactors in Canada. They actually purposefully produce certain isotopes that are used to diagnose people and for treatment. And those things come right out of nuclear power plants. So there's a lot to be said for this. So from an environmental standpoint, why do I support nuclear? Why do I think it's so great? Well, life cycle emissions. We already talked about how it doesn't produce any emissions on combustion because you're not burning anything. However, every source of energy has life cycle emissions because you got to build the stuff. You got to build the nuclear plant or the solar facilities or the battery storage or whatever, what have you. When you stack it all up, nuclear actually has the smallest life cycle greenhouse gas emissions of any energy source. That's pretty impressive. Did I do that right? Yeah. Okay. So land use. I don't have to tell you. Solar panels take up a lot of space. Okay. I think we all know that. And the facts bear this out. Nuclear has the smallest physical footprint of any energy source. That means you're conserving land. It's pretty important, I think. And this picture just goes to show that it's a little bit misleading. The onshore wind, if you look at the spacing and the impacts between turbines, that's something to consider too. If you actually consider the space between turbines, there's a lot of land occupation for wind as well. Material intensity, what goes into our energy sources? Well, as it turns out, you might think, well, wind and solar, the wind is free, the sun is free, they're not extractive resources, right? They're pretty extractive when you look at the materials that are required to make them work. And you can see the line up here. This is just the nuts and bolts, the steel, cement, aluminum, copper, things like that. And you see that nuclear actually has the smallest material requirement intensity of any energy source. So folks will say, okay, well, Keith, you are forgetting something, aren't you? Because there's uranium, there's fuel that's required for nuclear power, right? Let's add fuel to this equation. When you add fuel to this equation, we're going to add another element to this, which is fuel on top of everything else. Yeah, that changes the picture. It swamps things out. Coal and gas have a lot of drilling associated with them, a lot of mining associated with them. So yeah, they're pretty extractive. There's a red bar representing fuel for nuclear as well, but it's so small you can't see it. The amount of mining needed for nuclear is incredibly small. Why is that? Well, it's because energy density. One uranium pellet, about the size of a gummy bear, has as much energy content as a ton of coal. That's pretty darn amazing. And the reality is that if you have a small amount of fuel going in, it means you have a small amount of waste going out, right? And then the reality is that all the spent fuel, we save this stuff. We don't burn it. We don't put it in the atmosphere. We save it, and it's put into dry cask storage, which others who will come after me will talk about. But all that spent fuel, all of it, 60 years worth for the entire country, would have fit into a single Walmart, a single super Walmart. The volumes are manageable. These are things that we can handle. My friend Carl here is going to talk about the benefits of recycling, reprocessing waste. We can get even more energy out of that. I'll save that for him. But bottom line is, if you have a source of energy, high energy density, small material use, little waste, what does that add up? It adds up to conservation. You get to protect nature, right? To me, that's pretty darn important. And maybe that's why we're seeing a lot of support for nuclear now. From across the political spectrum, bipartisan support, the ADVANCE Act, that was passed in June 2024 under the Biden administration to accelerate and deploy advanced nuclear technologies with the goal of tripling our nuclear capacity by the year 2050. Remember this guy, John Kerry? He was pretty strongly anti-nuclear in his past. Now he says we need it. We've got to have it. So people can change, people can learn, people can come to understand. How about this guy? Our president today, he's upping the notch as well. He's saying we're going to quadruple our nuclear capacity by 2050, and he's put forward some important programs to make that happen, executive orders to make that happen. Here's a quote from the Energy Secretary Chris Wright. He says, as global energy demand continues to grow, the department's going to work diligently and creatively to enable the rapid deployment and export of next generation nuclear technology. Why is that word export so important? I'll tell you why it's important. Right now, I think in the past, you could say that the superpower that wins is a superpower that had as many nuclear weapons stationed around the world. I don't think that's the case anymore. Now the superpower that wins is going to be the superpower that has most of its own nuclear power plants stationed around the world. And guess what? Russia and China are trying to do that. They're trying to build their nuclear power plants all over the place. And that's pretty scary, because once you do that, you're developing a long-term, 100-year relationship with those other countries. I don't think that's something we should be ceding to Russia and China. We need to be players in that game. So, a lot of good reasons to support nuclear, whether you're Republican, whether you're Democrat. And so great things are happening, actually. We're seeing nuclear power plants across the country being proposed. Don't have time to go through all this. We'll talk about it more later. But some great things are happening. Here's another list. Again, it's just too much to show at one time, but we'll get into it. And New York is now on the list as well. What's happening here in New York? Last year, September 2024, the governor pulled together a meeting, Future Energy Economic Summit in September of 2024, basically realizing we have to look at this holistically. This is not a one-size-fits-all thing. This is not something where we can restrict the type of technologies that we're going to consider. We need a diversity of solutions. And for the first time, she talked about splitting the atom, so I give her credit for that. But I really want to give her credit for bringing the right people to the room. I mean, that's Amber Begg. She's from Micron, talking about how we need reliable energy. Okay, so good discussions, important discussions are now happening. There's a blueprint for consideration of advanced nuclear technologies. That's been complete already. A master plan for responsible and advanced nuclear development. The completion of that is scheduled for 2026. There's multi-state consortiums and a first movers initiative going on involving states from around the country to look at how can we pool resources and overcome some of the challenges that we know exist. There is an RFI, a request for information from NYSERDA that was issued several months ago to industry users, those interested in supply chains and workforce and potential host communities. And then more recently, I think it was July of this year, the governor announced that NYPA would be helping to build at least 1 gigawatt of advanced nuclear by the year 2040. That's pretty powerful. And most recently, there's an RFI, request for information from NYPA now, to potential host communities and nuclear vendors to make it all happen. It's an exciting time. I don't know if I went over my time period or not, but I'm done. Thank you, folks.
Hello, everyone. And Assemblyman, thank you very much for the privilege to show up here and be talking about a very important topic. My name is Yusuf Balud. If you don't know how to pronounce it, just remember when my daughter did when she ran for office at the Sarasota County. She said Both balloons. And so going from there, I'm going to take you to the year 1946, right at the end of, just after the end of World War II. A short, white-haired Jewish captain, United States Navy, shows up in his boss's office. He is the head of naval operations. And he tells them, we're going to do one of those things that Oppenheimer did in Los Alamos and put it in. Thank you. That's when you were here because nobody complained. So, and he tells him, we need to take one of those things and put it in one of our submarines because it can run forever. And so the admiral, his boss, goes out and he talks to some of his friends. He says, this crazy captain, Rickover, wants to put a nuclear bomb in my submarines. And the rest is history. He succeeded, and that day, that action and what followed was the moment that pressurized water reactors were born. And now they proliferated all over the world. And they run without problems. Now I'm going to tell you a second story. Saratoga County is where we lived. My kids went to school in Clifton Park, Shenandoah High School. Now I live in Idaho after 30 years in Clifton Park. I work at the Idaho National Laboratory, the premier nuclear lab in the nation. And my daughter, at the time, I think she was like 13 or 14. I was given the privilege of taking my entire family inside the USS Philadelphia. It's a nuclear submarine. So when we got to the compartment where the reactor is, so I'm going to show you something. Imagine that this is the reactor, and the outside is the wall of the thing that surrounds it. So here's what I did. I did this. And I took my hand away. I said, Layla, that's my daughter. Try it. I said, Dad, yeah, it's hot. It's obvious. No, you try it. So finally, I convinced her to try it. She did this. Dad, you're lying. I said, yes, get used to it. That is what happens around nuclear technology. People lie all the time. And sometimes intentional, and sometimes it's not. My guess, at that moment, my daughter remembered that. She's a professor now of U.S. foreign policy. That's what she teaches. And she tells that story sometimes. So let me show you something that's related to us here. My company is called Cadmos. I left the Idaho National Laboratory a few weeks ago. This is the first month that I'm not working there. I was working there partially in October. So the reason we're talking here more than anything else, it's about small modular reactors. So what makes them different? When you look at any reactor today that you can see from a distance, you're really talking about the big reactors, what we call today the AP1000. So that's reference to 1,000 megawatt electricity, lots and lots of energy. But now there's something happening in the country, actually across the technological world. So we're just not going to name countries beyond ours. And people are talking about SMRs, more than anything else, is to feed electricity. Not neutrons, electricity. To what? To data centers. So when you go and you Google something, let's just say use this much electricity. If you use ChatGPT, use this much electricity. The multiple factor of energy needed to run these data centers is amazing. Of course, what you get out of it, a lot better things and more information and so on. So we need to build these small modular reactors. Why? Because they can actually have the amount of energy you need right where you need it at less cost, much safer, and I'll explain what safer means in nuclear. And it uses a lot of the know-how in nuclear technology that we have today. So let me just say what safer is. A lot of people talk about safety in nuclear technology. Well, what I like to let you know, in Russia, in China, in France, here, And everywhere in the few other countries that actually build their own nuclear reactors and nuclear technology, they're all safe. They're all safe. So generally, I don't discuss safety on nuclear technology. I've been inside nuclear submarines with my family because I know it's safe. In fact, nuclear submarine sailors, when they come out of their submarine after a 9-month or 6-month, depending on their tour, they come out, they are radiation deficient. Because you and I, we are exposed to radiation every day. It's part of our health. We get cosmic radiation all day long during the daytime. When you sit in a submarine, it's so safe, you actually are radiation deficient. Because they're underwater, they don't get the cosmic. The reactor is so safe, they don't get anything. So keep that in the back of your mind. One of the great benefits of SMRs, instead of building it where everybody can see you, and it's so expensive because you're building it, imagine you're taking a Camry and you are building it in your garage. Well, that's very expensive. But if it's built in a factory, you can see the difference. Oops. So I want to show you one more thing. What the picture you saw there was for the so-called SMR. This is even smaller. This is a microreactor. The fundamental difference between the two is just the size. Even the huge behemoth is the same thing. Because what Keith just showed you before, the U-235, or the neutrons hitting an atom and the atoms generating more neutrons and all of that serves one purpose. Nuclear reactors is nothing more than a kettle. It just boils water. Really, that's what it does. And then you take that hot water and you do things with it. Ultimately, is to make that steam that comes out of it to run a turbine that makes electricity. That's it. So it is a hard science. We know that. And it's a science that we needed to learn how we tame it over the years. Marie Curie, the French great scientist, who actually is the only woman in history who had 2 Nobel Prizes, died because she didn't understand radiation. But we do now. It's because of people like her. And then SMR will give us one great benefit. Actually, he can locate it closer to the point of reception of electricity. So you save a lot of, when you try to heat something with electricity, that's called resistive heat. When the electricity goes through the wire, you lose some of the electricity to that, and that's not desirable. So the closer you are to the source, the less losses will be. Oops. There. So this red truck actually is stolen a little bit from my granddaughter. She lives in Manhattan Island. And why do we have that? Because, remember I told you can build a Toyota in your garage or in the factory, same thing with SMRs. You're building in a factory, you take the pieces like Legos, and you assemble it on the site. The reduction in cost is tremendous. It's actually more than half. So there's a lot of reduction in cost and also in errors. I've been involved with the nuclear Navy for 26 years there in building reactors, and roughly 2 a year. That's what the Navy does. Not one is like the other. Not one. And people think, oh, you make it perfect and it's like the blueprint. No, no. The safety is the same, but number 1 and number 10, they're different. Toyota is number 1 and number 1 million. They're exactly the same. Because they're assembled in a factory, air-conditioned, everybody is, they can wear a tie like me and just do your job. So it allows you to get things more exactly what should look like in a blueprint. And then also there's one more thing that's very beneficial. That. Because every one of you is probably asking the question, those crazy engineers, are they giving us something safe? Well, how many American civilians have been killed because of nuclear mishap in a nuclear power plant. 0. We only had TMI, 3 Mile Island. That's actually, I'm standing in front of you with my engineering background in nuclear because of 3 Mile Island. I was a kid. And I just learned that if I don't know something, I better learn. So that's what drew me to TMI and then in nuclear engineering. Are you kicking me out, Scott? Yeah. So these technologies, none of them are new. They all exist, and they're employed, all of them, in the service of safe reactors. Remember I told you before, nuclear technology is safe. So you all heard, unfortunately, nearly 19,000 people were killed in Japan under the Fukushima accident. So 19,000 people roughly. So how many died because of nuclear? No one. The news doesn't tell you that. They say, oh, 19,000 people were killed. Very unfortunate, very sad. They're all drowned. They're all drowned. No one died because of nuclear. Chernobyl is a different story, but all the people that died, they're heroes of humanity, because they went into the reactor to fight the fires, whatever it was, and they knew that if they stayed any longer than a certain amount of minutes, they're not going to live. They were really, truly heroes of humanity. And so now, an SMR is a tiny little thing, and I want to really, really take your attention to this. The emergency planning zone. For a big reactor like this, this photo is of the Vogel reactor in Virginia. Those are the last 2 reactors built in the United States. Last. The EPZ around the reactor is 10 miles, just to be sure that it's safe. And what it is just if something happens to the reactor, a plume comes out, it has what we call in it fission products. That's actually some of the stuff, gas is born inside the reactor. So to keep the entire neighborhood safe, so there's a 10-mile around it. The NRC, there's just one more minute and I'm out of here. So the NRC actually did something amazing that they approved. It says at the fence line. And when the NRC actually approved this thing at the fence line, the land mass that actually the SMR is sitting on, this was done for a company called NuScale, 20 acres. If you do the math, you'll find out that if you put the reactor in the center, the fence is 500 feet away. Because why do you need all these things? If something happens, goes wrong, everybody's safe. It gets worse, though. Look at that, 50-mile ingestion. There is nothing for ingestion in this SMR business because it's so much smaller. What we call in the nuclear business source term. That means how much radioactivity and fission product in the reactor is down to 0. He's kicking me out. All right.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carl Perez, and I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Exodus Energy, which is actually a nuclear fuel recycling technology developer based here in New York. And there are really 2 important elements to take from this slide. Obviously, the rendering's beautiful. It doesn't look like West Valley, which I'm definitely glad to take a lot of time to discuss, especially at the table or during the event. Just so you know, I'm going to try to keep the presentation short to make sure that we have a full hour for Q&A. But I will stay all night, if need be, even until tomorrow, to answer every single one of your questions, because you came here and we owe you answers. Now, the 2 things that are important here is I'm a co-founder. That's because a lot of my team actually worked at La Hague, which is where we actually recycle nuclear waste in France. And they've done it at the industrial scale, where ultimately in France, they recycle all of their spent nuclear fuel. An element that Keith in his presentation referred to and Youssef briefly spoke about. The other thing is we say recycling nuclear waste to fuel the future. Because obviously we can explain to you the history of nuclear power, but I used to be anti-nuclear. And so one of the drivers for creating this company is we may not necessarily all agree on what the past of nuclear was, but if you're here in this room, it's because you can participate in the future of what it should look like. And I think that's so crucial because there's this RFI that's out. And so you as a community member have the ability to influence what type of nuclear power you want. If you don't want water to be used to cool the reactor, that's fine. We can use air-cooled condensers. But declare that interest and make yourself heard. It's like having an opinion but not going to vote. And so I think that nuclear power is extremely important for our future. And I'll go into a bit about my story and what led me to where we are today. So I actually don't know where the clicker, oh, there's the clicker. So before I start getting into the technology itself, that is where I grew up, in New York City. Now, we tend to think of New York City with Wall Street and all the banks and everything, but I actually grew up in affordable housing right here. And as you can see, there's also affordable housing right here, Peter Cooper and Stuyvesant Town. And right here, we have a natural gas plant. So not only was I anti-nuclear, but I was living in a fossil fuel community. And at least in the nuclear industry, every single bit of waste is accounted for. The waste of this plant is right here. Walking back from the soccer field where I took this picture, that's right here, you'd smell the sulfur. And the other part of the waste is in my lungs. But every single bit of nuclear waste is accounted for. And that's what we're going to start going into. And the other thing is, when I say that I was firmly anti-nuclear, it's not just, I wasn't a fan of it. My father protested against the construction of nuclear power plants in France and got beat up by riot police, just because of how opposed he was to it. And what we realize is that we're opposed to nuclear bombs, we're opposed to nuclear waste, but information is power. And that's why I really hope to give you as much information from what I've learned in the nuclear industry. But your opinions are really what matters the most, especially if we're going to build nuclear in New York. So I was hoping to show you actual pictures of me standing on top of a nuclear reactor, a BWR-6, the exact one that was at Fukushima. But I couldn't get the pictures cleared from our clients. So we'll have to settle for this research reactor at McMaster University in Canada. And by the way, if you come to the table, I'll show you those pictures. But this right here is a reactor. And no hazmat suits, no hard hats, it's super safe to stand on top of. And right here, you see all the spent nuclear fuel. So nuclear fuel, as yourself and Keith was referring to, is actually basically tubes of zirconium in which you have little pellets of uranium. And so when we're thinking about waste and nuclear waste, there's obviously the equipment, the protective clothing, and we're going to go into that, but the most important source of waste, the stuff that's radioactive for 10,000 years, is that. And as you can see, it doesn't take a lot of learning, but more importantly, this stuff is radioactive for over 10,000 years. Yet you have people here without hazmat suits. The hard hats are in case you obviously fall or get hit by something. And these are just 100% cotton overalls to make sure that you don't have any gases that stick to your clothing. In fact, as Yusuf was mentioning, you get less radiation from working in a nuclear power plant than being on a flight. Because when we're working with our clients to recycle their spent nuclear fuel, we actually would go to their site, stand on top of the reactor, put in 9-hour shifts an entire week on top of the spent fuel pool, literally putting the spent fuel in casks that are then going to be put on site. And all throughout that process, in an entire week, I got 10 times the radiation dose from being on a 2-hour flight. Because of the cosmic radiation, as Yusuf was alluding to. Which, frankly, I knew those are safe, but I didn't realize that they're even cleaner than when you're outside. So if we have any consultants in the room, make sure that you wear dosimeter when you go to work and complain, because you definitely get a higher dose than some of these nuclear workers, in fact, if not all. So when we want to talk about the waste specifically, what are we talking about? You have the low-level waste, which is really 90% of the total volume, but really 1% of the radioactivity. And frankly, a lot of the stuff is actually recycled by energy solutions or waste control specialists. So they recycle the protective clothing and all these different materials. Then you have a category that exists in Europe that we call intermediate level waste. And that's roughly 7% of the volume, but again, a very low percentage of the radioactivity. This is radioactive for 10 to 300 years, and you can definitely put it at surface. I don't know you're coming out of this saying that there's no waste at all and everything can be recycled, because that's frankly not true, and it's not true for any energy source. So please don't hesitate to find me outside or ask questions on stage so we can speak to all of this. But in fact, in Europe they have this categorization to dissociate from this stuff. But in the United States, for the most part, all of this is considered high-level waste.
So we're even more careful here. But this is what we really consider problematic. And again, we're a nuclear fuel recycling company, so I have every financial incentive to tell you that the waste is dangerous, and that it cannot be on site, and that it's not properly protected. But frankly, it is, especially coming from someone who used to be anti-nuclear. The one thing that it definitely is an untapped economic opportunity that you really have no idea how big it can be. And so you're talking about 3% of the volume, accounting for 96% of the total radioactivity. And so let's start getting into that. When you look at a spent fuel rod, you basically have 4% fission products, and this is the stuff that we even have trouble recycling, but you only use 4 to 5% of the energy content of the uranium. And so you basically have 96% of that spent fuel, of those little pellets that you're referring to, Keith, that could be reused. And at least in our process, which is very different from what was built at West Valley and what's operated at La Hague in France, we could actually recycle this stuff at least 12 times before we really start to get diminishing returns on the isotopics. And again, I can spend as much time as you'd like answering all those questions. So this is what we reutilize. So we don't have to bury it underground. In this material, in fact, there's actually medical isotopes, as we referred to, like technetium-99, moly-99, and having two parents that survived cancers 2 years ago, this is something that I'm particularly passionate about. How can we remove some of the radioisotopes in here and use them for cancer treatments and make sure that they don't cost as much as they do? Because we have to rely on the Canadian supply. So what's the real value here? Well, because we only used 5% of the material, we actually have 90,000 tons of spent nuclear fuel, which means that we used 90,000 tons to power all the nuclear power that we have today. And we only use 5% of that. So our objective is to be able to unearth all that uranium so we don't have to necessarily mine as much. And the total value of that uranium, instead of importing it, which we do for 99% of the uranium that we use in the United States, we're looking at $14.3 billion worth of material that we don't have to go buy. In Oswego, there's a mine of uranium that we cannot wait to unearth the material out of. And this is this is revenue, direct revenue to the communities. And we're not using that today. And that's why we talk about the future that we want to create. And every year we discharge 2,000 tons, which is roughly equal to $360 million that could be reused, or at least avoided. And this is a rough, if we had all the piping in here, you wouldn't see anything. But basically, you're talking about 20 skids with stainless steel frames being brought on site, and that's your recycling facility. This ain't a West Valley. I think the most important thing is to show the evidence. It's all good to show the renderings and everything, but we actually recycled multiple batches at Idaho National Lab. We processed radioactive gases at Pacific Northwest National Lab, and we even have utilities paying for our R&D at Argonne National Lab. And obviously glad to show you as many images as you like. This is all I can clear just for public forum. So I want to thank you again for your time, for being here. Please don't hesitate to find me at the table to answer any and all questions that you may have. And again, we won't go waste. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Greg Lancet, who is the president of the Northern and Central New York Building Trades Council. So I got that right. Thank you.
You did great on time, Carl. Can everybody hear me okay? I don't need the clicker because I didn't bring slides. It's really here to talk about the economic advantages of skilled trades and a career in construction. The energy workforce is aging very much like our light water reactors that are in service throughout the country. Those reactors, we are still tethered to those as building trades because during the refueling, there is a lot of planned maintenance and upgrades and safety features that are either repaired, enhanced, or installed. The industry itself is very heavily regulated, as you can see, and I'm going to do my best not to make our assemblage of our experts here the punchline to a joke, because on my way in, I got 4 scientists and a pipe fitter, is kind of what we are tonight. You know, so a career in the energy industry from a building trades perspective, any one of the communities that host or are going to host in the future are not only going to receive economic benefits of housing one of these facilities, the tax base, the school funding, and the lowering of the responsibility of all of us that live in the community, and it helps offset that with the cost of living in the community. But it's also the jobs to build it. Many of the newer reactors, as you have heard, a lot of them are made in controlled environments, in factories or manufacturing facilities. That does guarantee consistency in product and a higher standard of reliability versus built in the field. So in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, when the light water reactors were being built, it wasn't uncommon to have 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 construction workers there. And I'll tell you what, everybody in the building trades, and I know there's a lot of you that know construction and all of that in this room, in this assembly tonight, but with the harmony of all of that, working on the jobs, working on the industry cutting-edge technologies, building these facilities, it gives the construction workforce a skill set that is second to none, and that it raises a standard of skill set that the construction workers could go on to the next town, to the next reactor, the next city, where that type of reactor is being built, and they have such a niche skill set. Now, like most of the other presenters here, the Building Trades Council, we don't have one particular source of energy to achieve cleaner energy, more abundance, or any of that. It's actually a message of all of the above, because it does take all forms to achieve carbon reduction, pollution reduction, and still meet the demands of the electricity that our world is facing. In central New York, there is a pretty large semiconductor plant that's going to be heading to Clay, New York, and they're going to require a lot of energy. And with the tremendous amount of energy coming in New York State, it is a fine line to straddle the decarbonization of our energy sources and that. But I will tell you that without the additional energy that's going to be generated for the grid, for our homes, for our communities, for future manufacturing facilities or any of that, we have to just keep in lockstep with that and with that growth. Now, everybody is here tonight to hear what we have to say. There's going to be a lot of questions and a lot of answers, but these meetings are going around, they are happening around New York State. New York State, I give them a tip of the hat because they're asking communities to host these meetings to gauge willingness of communities that would raise their hand and say, our community would like to host a future reactor. It's going on in Western New York, it's going on in the Southern Tier, it's going on here. And I want to thank Assemblyman Gray, because you've had your eye on this right from the beginning for years, and we've been talking about this for years. So these are the first of many, but, you know, these are jobs in our standpoint, for not only us standing here, but also for our generations, our children and grandchildren. The nuclear industry, the reactors, the safety factor, and the runtime, it has been proven. It's being proven every day. And a lot of our workers that work in the facilities, either building the new ones or helping refuel or maintain the existing operating ones, they're very good livings, and that money stays right here in the community where the worker comes home and raises their family. So for every dollar spent on any of that, I'm not an economist, but the dollar turns 6 to 7 times before it actually leaves the community. So to be a host community, not only as landowners and everything else, do we get the break and the benefit and we have the abundance, but we have a job hub for a skill set that is unique, and it's very regulated and very safe, and that is why we are here actually supporting the efforts there. It's really amazing how far the technology has advanced in the last couple decades. But I'm gonna not wait for Scott's timer to go off. I'm gonna thank each and every one of you. Take my chair on the couch, and we will be here all night, so thank you.
Can you hear me? Thank you so much, Keith, Yusuf, Carl, and Greg. And I'm not going to waste any time because we're running a little bit later. And you might remember 45 minutes ago or so on that housekeeping slide, I mentioned that our plan for this evening was there are some questions that folks submitted through the pre-registration process, and Andy is beaming them up here in this massive font that I can read without my cheaters. And I'm going to start with those, but please do feel free. That's the QR code, and we tested it yesterday that even from the back row, it works on a phone, that would take you on the app where you could submit one. Instantly, it would go to Andy. There's also the ability, if you get Andy or Larry's attention, who's now with us, you could hand a sheet of paper that Andy and Larry will be sifting to us. So without further ado, this first question, I think I'll leave it up to you gentlemen to decide between you who it might be most appropriate for. But the question we received was, would Northern New York see direct financial benefit from nuclear energy production here? Specifically, reduction of free energy or meaningful property tax relief is what someone asked.
It's nothing free. If it's free, it's probably not good. So it's not going to be free. There's a cost to actually having nuclear technology come into the area. But let me talk about the benefit, a tremendous benefit. First, a small modular reactor will probably bring about 80 to 100 jobs, permanent jobs, into the facility. That's inside. Labor force, it doesn't exist in abundance in the country, not just here, in California and Georgia, wherever you go. We don't have, I'm not talking about getting an engineering degree, just the welding that you have to do is specific, the pipe fitting you have to do is very specific, all that. And then there is one thing that is tangible but not pretty obvious, the draw that will bring industries from somewhere else, because now you have available energy. You have electrons. They need it. So that obviously is pretty clear. If this is done, we're building this reactor not just for the community, but also to feed the data centers if they come here. Well, that's just, you're going to have a lot of jobs in here. That's just the bottom line. And with those jobs, you bring in also a higher level of education by force. So there are a lot of benefits for having this.
Thank you, Yusuf. Ezra, would you like me to give the wireless mic to that table, or what sounds best? I heard feedback. Could you folks hear Yusuf's answer? Okay, you could. Second question is, and again, I don't know, maybe this would be for Carl, given some of your slides. Will the energy from the nuclear plant, if it were to be built in Jefferson County, be sent to New York City or remain local? As the question was posed in various formats. Go for it, Keith, sure.
Okay. Well, I think it's going to depend. I mean, I think there's a here for either one. I think there's definitely interest in the Messina area and in other places upstate here to build industry, and those are going to be demand loads that are going to require electricity. I'd like to see the benefits right here. I think that's the most positive thing that can happen. I will say that downstate they've got themselves into a pickle. They've shut down some of their nuclear power plants, and so there's an opportunity there if upstate wanted to sell electricity down there. I think those are choices.
Okay, great. Others, or? Yes.
I agree with Keith. The only case I see where some of this energy will go downstate if we have enough production that we made it an economic decision to sell it. So the only way it would go downstate if you people here make the decision now to sell it, and then when you sell it, you sell it to whoever needs it. But it's not the first choice. In my view, the first choice is not just the community itself, but the industry in the community will be the first consumer of that energy. If there is abundance of it that you can actually sell it to somebody on the outside, then fine, you sell it to New York City.
I think the end uses are critical here because it also dictates what's the type of financial package that's going to go behind the reactor, right? And if you're doing this because you're trying to supply, New Yorkers downstate, then they definitely ought to pay for the nuclear power plant. What I will say is that you're seeing a lot of interest from the hyperscalers to build data centers, and we want to make sure that companies like Micron and many others compete to be in northern New York and create more jobs and create more economic value and tax revenue. So I believe personally that if we can get the hyperscalers here, we can avoid getting subsidies to cover the need to go build these nuclear power plants. Because if the hyperscalers want that power, then they ought to pay for it.
Thank you. The next question relates to safety. Will a mini nuclear plant require the same extensive emergency response plan with sirens, alert, levels of emergency, evacuation routes, as are currently required around existing nuclear power plants?
So I definitely have an answer, but I'm going to pass it on to Youssef to make sure he gets his in.
Yeah, actually, it's the last point I was talking about. I talked about EPZ, the emergency planning zone. This is exactly what you're talking about. Yes, they will have the alarm systems and all that inside because of NRC and safety rules and all that. Will you actually be worried about anything happening in the facility? I don't think so. I think, so I grew up next to, you can all be jealous now, next to a chocolate factory. And I really smelled beautiful chocolate. The only damage we got to it is sometimes the wind was bad and my mother's white sheets will be outside and you can just see black or brownish dots on the thing. Hopefully you never see that from a reactor because the reactor is completely covered, totally covered. So I don't expect those issues to come in. When I work at nuclear, Knoll Atomic Power Lab in downstate, basically near Albany, New York, I have a friend, her house was right across the river, the Mohawk River, and they could hear the alarms we had inside. So one day she said, we always are scared, so what's going on? So it's training. There's nothing going on, it's just a drill. They said, you have a drill like every week? So, yeah, we have a drill every week just to be aware and so on. But I don't expect the community to have an issue with it. Again, one thing actually, let me add to this, I didn't get to explain it back there. Most of the SMRs that I know of, it's what we call below grade. So unlike what you see in the big, like the Georgia Tech, Georgia reactors and so on, there's actually, you bore a hole in the ground and you put the reactor in it. So there's a tremendous safety from putting a nuclear reactor in the ground.
I was just going to say that even for recycling systems, the vast majority of our costs is all about safety, criticality control, and making sure that the system actually, is super reliable, clean. So I don't know who's receiving a call, but you ought to answer that. But I actually was really anti-nuclear up until I started reading into how the Nuclear Regulatory Commission manages the safety of its nuclear power plants. Very onerous requirements, and that's great. So I really think that the safety of nuclear power plants is really unrivaled. You have more people that have died in New York in the last 20 years from gas explosions than the entire nuclear industry, bombs, not bombs with Hiroshima, but you take Chernobyl, you take all the incidents, it still does not really even half of actually it's a tenth of the casualties of the gas explosions just in New York.
I could add, I mean, you lived right next to a fossil fuel power plant, right? You were experiencing firsthand the impacts of that, okay? I mean, you talk about, you know, EPZ area. I mean, you were living within an area where impacts were, right.
EPZ, that thing explodes. Lower East Side is uninhabitable.
That's my point, is that I'm really grateful that the nuclear industry does that. I wish other industries did that type of thing, frankly.
Just a quick pause. Andy, are we getting any hands raised and any on paper? I wanted to, okay, so if, okay, so you're on top of, sorry, I was looking that other way. Greg, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about, your opinion on, will this alternative curtail the sprawl of solar panel farms, do you think?
It's hard to say if that would actually curtail the sprawl, but the necessity for it would be diminished because of the amount of energy coming out of such smaller concentrated spaces. So yes, it may, not to have them compete, but we have seen on the slides tonight the footprints required for modern nuclear facilities. They're small. We're talking 10 acres, 20 acres. Drop them in, and you know, not only do they blend in well with the abstract and the site that it's placed on, but it's not as intrusive or sprawling with that. But I think with the production and the production of electricity that could be used, the yield, obviously the smaller package there, and it may diminish some of the larger scale PV panel arrays that are in planning or in place today.
If I could just add a little bit of context to that, I mean, I agree. I think what we have learned here in New York, and we're learning it the hard way, is that we do need a diversity of solutions. With the CLCPA, there has been an initial emphasis on wind, solar, and batteries. I think there is definitely a role for wind, solar, and batteries, but we're finding that it's not going to be enough. It's just not going to be enough. And if you know, and frankly, the question was posed by somebody who's concerned about energy sprawl, right? Okay, so I talk to communities a lot, actually, upstate, who are very concerned about the proliferation of wind and solar facilities across the landscape. It's funny because when I talk about our energy system, you know, I talk for about an hour or so, but first half of it I'm just talking about, you know, the projections, the NYSERDA's projections for how much we would need for different sources, how much wind, how much solar, how much batteries, how much of everything. And, you know, the last half of my presentation is about nuclear power. But before I even get to that, somebody in the back of the room invariably raises their hand and says, why the hell aren't we just doing nuclear? I think there's something to be said for that. We need a diversity. So yeah, wind and solar, I think, are part of it, but nuclear needs to be too. And when you do the math, a gigawatt reactor, which is what we're talking about with NYPA right now, that's, if you try to do that with solar, the amount of energy to produce the same amount of energy over a year's worth of time, you'd need about 30,000 acres worth of solar to produce 1 gigawatt. And you wouldn't be getting electricity that's useful because you'd be getting it, you know, when the sun's shining. A lot of time in the summertime, very little in the wintertime, nothing at night. So then you have to add storage and things like that. So yeah, I think the happy medium that I'm hoping we're going to migrate toward that communities and folks around the state can support is a modest increase in wind, a modest increase in solar, and a modest increase in nuclear. When you add those together, I think we can actually solve this problem.
When we shut down Indian Point, New York City lost 60% of its clean electricity. And ultimately, that was supposed to be replaced by wind. What ended up happening is we built, what was it? We built 2 new natural gas plants, and we upgraded a 3rd one. So we transformed what was clean power into dirty power because we couldn't get wind online in time. And I think what I'm trying to say with that remark is, let's not have renewables try to replace nuclear, which is already clean power, displace that. It's let's do it all if we have the energy need. But to your point, there's just no way around energy density and having your entire lifetime's worth of power fit in the palm of your hand.
Let me add something. Let me add something very important to this point. I support nuclear, I support solar, and I support wind. I really do. But the one thing that people really need to know about solar and wind, and especially solar, first, the expected lifetime of a solar panel, the good ones, is about 20 years. So to also have the solar energy be replaced by batteries at night, that takes also a lot of batteries. These batteries also have limited lifetime. The toxicity to the environment from these elements, people just don't talk about it. They say nothing about it. Yes, of course, Carl talked about nuclear waste, and it is an issue, and we know we need to take care of it. But the question of the toxicity of the waste that comes out of all these materials, that actually, the same thing actually is true for all the fiberglass and other materials that go into the making of the wind turbines, is a point that to pay attention to. And I'm not talking about just, well, it will kill the birds, and of course, that's important. But I'm actually talking about the long time it will take to tame these materials. It's not just nuclear that actually needs to be paid attention to, all these other too. And then one more thing. I like to talk about Toyota more than anything else because I have a Toyota. If we have a factory of Toyota, President Trump is actually telling the Japanese they need to build more cars in the United States, and that's great. And if a factory is in a place where we have 1,000 megawatt of electricity coming out of a solar field, how are you going to run that factory at night? Oh, well, I bring batteries. Would you run the economy of a country on batteries? You can't.
Thank you.
Just one last thing. You know, I said I come at this from an engineering standpoint. I also come at this from an ecological standpoint. As an engineer, I support nuclear because I know we need it. As an environmentalist, I support it because it lets us tackle climate change while protecting nature at the same time.
Thank you. The next question has to do with nuclear waste, and the question is very simply, where will any nuclear waste be stored? Is that known now, and if so, how would you answer it?
So as I was mentioning during the presentation, it's safely stored on site. Frankly, again, I have every financial incentive to say we need to get rid of it, we need to recycle right away, but it really is safe. And in fact, the casks that hold the spent nuclear fuel or would transport them, they've shot missiles at them, they ran trains into them. I mean, they've done all type of wild tests just to show how rigorous it is. But the 90,000 tons of spent nuclear fuel in the United States are currently stored across 78 different sites. That's basically how waste is managed today. There's an effort to be able to get at a geological repository, and so what we're trying to do is avoid having to put that in a hole that's 1 kilometer deep underground and actually reuse it in our nuclear power plant. So there's a real effort, and we're not the only company at it. And in fact, part of the executive orders, which we helped write, was actually to ordain, let's start recycling our spent nuclear fuel.
Great, thanks. The next question has multiple parts, all related to the SMR manufacturing. So starts with, where do you believe they will be manufactured? Where is the technology developed, the research for it? Are there any risks, AKA backdoors to the programming, and is there a remote hijacking risk? So all in the context of the SMRs, I believe.
So I can't predict if there's a moron somewhere who's going to do something bad. We can't predict that. But let me tell you about the technology itself. What we're talking about is a facility that will have in it the pumps, that will have in it the steel, that will have in it the zircaloy. Zircaloy is the material that actually has the fuel pellets in it. The fuel pellets actually run the reactor. They're all sitting in this factory, and it's pretty much and almost the same thing like you might expect to see in a car factory, an assembly line basically, except this one, it's either robots or people assembling things together in a very novel way. And so that's very important. So the cost will be going down tremendous because of that process, but the safety of the manufacturing is no different from manufacturing anything else. So that's people worry, well, do you have uranium here, sir? Well, we know how to handle uranium. Basically, in the last 30 years, I stood next to uranium. I handled uraniums in glass vials and all that. Apparently, I'm shiny, but not because of the plutonium. And so the factories can be anywhere. I would love to see an assembly factory for SMRs here. There is no reason why it cannot be here. So the very first thing you ask, is there something about the environment of this area that doesn't allow it? No, because it actually doesn't need anything specific. You just do seismic analysis, environmental impact study like we do with anything, and make sure that the community is online and with you, and that's it. So it is not a technology that is very difficult to achieve. That's it.
I was going to hand it.
Oh, so what I'm also going to add is a lot of these SMR companies are trying to build factories in California, Utah, in many different states. Do you know which state has the best nuclear design organization in the world? Georgia? All right, we're taking others. New York? Do you know where in New York? Niskayuna. So when we talk about the Naval Reactor Program, and the folks that are designing 2 reactors a year, in fact, building them, they're all in Niskayuna. Why not let them use that talent and see them go to California or elsewhere when we can actually have a manufacturing facility
here and preserve those jobs and that quality, those quality researchers and engineers. So I hope we can do it here, because that would mean that we'd be losing our talent to other states.
I want to add one more thing to the statement. It's clean technology. It's very important. It's actually clean. So if you go to a farm, you see the refuse from the farm is just tremendously smelling and doing this and that to the environment, and we all know that. Not nuclear technology the way we do it, because you can't throw anything out of the factory. You cannot. So it's very, very clean.
I was going to say, to be able to manufacture nuclear components, you need an N stamp by ASME, which is the American Society for Mechanical Engineers. So to be able to have that certification, you need to be a particularly clean facility, and you're under much more rigorous standards than your normal manufacturing facility for anything else.
There are follow-up questions on the same SMR. How long would it take to build a full-scale nuclear power plant versus a length of time for an SMR from beginning construction to putting it on the grid, and what would the cost be
So
approximately?
it depends who you're asking. If you ask a salesman, he'll tell you tomorrow in the afternoon, do you want it at 3 p.m. or 5 p.m.? So, but that's, of course, not realistic. It depends on, first, the design itself, and if it's number 1 or number 2. Number 1, number 2 will be tremendous different in length of time, because part of the number 1 is the learning process. My guess is, if you went through the NRC process, I'm looking at I have a reactor design called CADMOS, and CADMOS actually can be built in 2 to 3 years. But that's because we designed it to be so that can be easily assembled and so on. Other reactors they claim less, others they claim more. But we have not been in the business outside the nuclear navy of building these specialized reactors. The first one will take more time than the second one, and it will be cheaper as you, just like the nth one is much cheaper than, so it should not be forever. But don't believe anybody who comes and tells you, I have everything, I put them on that building, I'm going to assemble them, it's going to take 6, 7 months. Tell them to keep walking. It's not true. And let me just want to add one more thing. It's very important also for you to understand that what that question really means. When you build a nuclear reactor, as I mentioned it earlier, don't expect that it will be exactly like blueprints. It never is. So you need to have the best welders and the best pipe fitters and the best people who will handle the cranes and all that. Those are non-engineers. That's the talent that's required and tremendously missing in the country, not just here. And it's not the guy like me that just goes and welds a broken part of the bicycle. And you look at the way I weld it, it's awful. No, we need the best expert in these things. So the impact on the community is beyond belief, really.
All of the projections that we're hearing, you know, it's hard to put a number on the small modular reactors and the newer technologies that are coming. But, you know, as a general rule of thumb, it's about 1,000 hard hats with tools in their hands, including the management support with that, with the smaller reactors. And it is, 4 to 5 years by the time they're commissioned. But that's about half the time and about 25% of the workforce versus the larger scale production reactors.
Thank you. The next one is from a college student. I'm in college right now and I'm very interested in nuclear fusion. What are the best ways to get involved in this part of the industry? Does New York have any ongoing projects or research with nuclear fusion and its applications?
Absolutely. There are a couple of accelerators, and actually Brookhaven National Lab. There are a couple of universities, including RPI, SUNY, that have been working on that. So it's a very exciting source of technology. In fact, some of them are looking at it just to transmute nuclear waste, some of the isotopes that we were mentioning in the fission products. So if you're the student in question that's here, feel free to come and talk and say hello. One thing I also want to kind of emphasize is you don't need to be a nuclear engineer by formation to work in the nuclear space. I found it very intimidating when I first got launched, but I actually co-founded my first nuclear company when I was a senior in undergrad. But I definitely had as co-founders folks that came from the Naval Reactor Program. So really, don't be shy. If you want to play a role in this nuclear resurgence, you don't have to be. We need anthropologists. We need communicators. We need so many more people than just engineers. So really, don't be afraid.
Fusion has been a reactor that, when you ask your professor, well, how far is fusion? 20 years? So in the 80s, I was in college, it was 20 years away. Today, it's still 20 years away. And the problem is not understanding. We know exactly how it works. It's materials. It's really the materials that contains the reactor. So if your passion is fusion, I think you should follow it. You should become a master in it and help the engineering talent. They need you to actually get to the point where we actually make the 20 years, 1 year, then it's done. It's just going to take time, but we should never give up. It's actually much better than fission reactors, much better, because there's some waste, but it's minimal. And so that's one great advantage. But the better advantage is the tremendous temperature you can achieve from fusion that will allow you to power more industry more efficiently. So.
It's ironic because actually just a few days ago, I had the opportunity to tour a laser facility in Rochester. It's actually the largest one in the country, I believe, that is doing research. And some of that laser research involves banging things together and making fusion happen. So it's exciting. I will agree with what Joseph said over there, that it is technology in terms of commercialization of it. I think we're still a ways away. You know, one of the things, I mean, there's a lot of enthusiasm in certain circles about fusion. I mean, the bottom line is, you know, and I actually asked this question a few days ago when giving the tour. You know, at some point, we can talk about fusion, but somebody somewhere, whether it's in a government lab or you know, a startup company or somebody's basement, somebody's actually got to build a fusion reactor where you're producing more electricity, not just energy at the microscopic level, but more electricity that comes out than you have to put into it. When's that going to happen? We need a prototype. Once you get the prototype, I think we can bring the cost down, and there's some real potential there. But somebody's got to do that first, and that hasn't happened.
Thank you. Greg, this next question was called out for you. Will workers need to be invited into the community, or do you believe that local members may be trained for the specific jobs involved in this?
That's actually a really good question, and I will tell you the energy workforce of tomorrow is everybody in our community today. The skill set with the trades there, you've heard about, some of the trades involved. The trades all have local presence. It's kind of hard to see us all. We don't wear special colored vests or anything, but there's 8,000 of us in the community within a 50-mile, 60-mile radius. So the trades can actually teach to that, the local trades that are here. It doesn't require having to go across the country or any of that to learn a technology or anything. But with our industry partners and the amazing engineering that goes into a lot of that and the safety from the government and the regulatory, the skill set can be taught locally to local people, and then you just have to enhance it and get good at it. There's one thing that none of the trades can teach, and that is hustle. So, they can teach you the skill set, the theory, and the technology, and the methods, and the material, but the individuals that have hustle to get better, to learn more and all that, they're the ones that exceed earnings expectations, and they do really well in this industry. And that does go across the board. It's, hustle is sometimes lacking. But each and every one of the members of the community that live here or growing up here that want to start putting stuff together and building it, they can learn that skill set homegrown to build these facilities.
Thank you. To insert a question here, I can't help but a little over an hour ago, you saw some survey results. A sample that wasn't just of folks who were interested enough and available enough to show up to a forum like this, but a sample across the masses of, there are a whole lot more people that live in Jefferson County than what you see right here. And the most common thing that came out as a concern, you might remember, from the folks that we spoke with was that pocketbook issue of my electricity bill. And I haven't heard any of you address the idea very straightforward of what would you anticipate would be the change, if any, that if this new enhancing all the renewables and nuclear reactors, as you suggest, that you support, what would be the effect on my wife and my electricity bill?
Just a quick question. Do we still have a lot of questions to go through?
This one's a really big one in front of me.
No, of course. I just want to make sure that we answer as many questions as possible since everyone, really came. But quick answer, lowest material requirement, lowest land use. The whole purpose of this is not to do nuclear energy because it's cool and it's scientific. It's because we want to get cheaper electricity.
It's for that reason, in a way that it's also, it's not just cheap from a financial perspective, cheap from a social health perspective, cheap from an environmental perspective. There's more than just money. Their lives. So we're motivated by more than just that. I know you definitely have something. Yeah.
Well, sure. And so the Department of Energy actually came up with a report called the Liftoff Report for Advanced Nuclear, and this question was addressed directly. Is it cheaper to just try to do it all with renewables, or is it more effective to have a firm, reliable nuclear component as part of your portfolio? The answer is it's more cost-effective to have firm, reliable electricity as part of it. One of the things that there's a misconception. Okay, price of solar panels have come down so dramatically. Okay, that's true, they have. But when you add the other system-level costs required to integrate intermittent renewables like solar and wind into the grid, the storage, the extra transmission, it could be 2 to 4 times as much transmission to bring electricity from all over the place. And then other stabilizing things, synchronous condensers, the things to make the grid actually continue to function. those add-ons actually add a lot of cost. And if you allow a certain portion of your electricity to be firm, reliable sources, like wind, like nuclear and like hydropower, then you can actually, you can get there at a more affordable rate. I think you were asking about downstate as well, right? Yeah, so I mean, the fact is, when Indian Point shut down, we saw an increase in fossil fuel use. We also saw electric rates go up.
If I may add, Lazard ran the numbers. The cheapest source of electricity in the
world is refurbished nuclear power plants, or nuclear power plants whose life had been extended. Because once you finance the entire plan on that 30-year project finance, now you're just squeezing out more power. We actually added 1 gigawatt of power in the United States, clean, just by squeezing out more energy from our nuclear power plants, without building an additional plant. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I called out for this.
They actually speak data.
Our second president once said that facts are undeniable, so you can't change that, so that's data. Based on what we know today, the kilowatt hour cost of, once it is established, sitting in place for these large reactors, is just about the same that you might be willing to pay for anything else. But when you build an SMR, so the SMRs change the game. The cost of the entire process from beginning to end to making an electron is, once it's set, maybe for the second to the third reactor, so the nth reactor and beyond, it's about 1/3 of what you might see from the big nuclear power plants. And so once you know these things, well, say, okay, it will be, at the beginning, it will probably be about the same rates that you'll be paying today. In the long run, you'll be paying less. So, so if I ask anybody here, so, well, are you willing to pay more for nuclear electricity because you love nuclear? No one will raise their hand. I won't either, because I want it to be reasonable. And so we know that we're going, especially the SMRs, will give you that ability to look at electricity at lower cost.
The next two questions have to do with potential benefits or lack thereof. The first one is, would the presence of a new nuclear site make the same area a target for an artificial intelligence data center that would utilize much of the new energy production, thus not directly benefiting local residents? Likely? Unlikely?
Remember that moron I talked about? He's coming back in that question. Well, this is, okay, yes, you could have people doing bad things, but I think ultimately, look at what I expect a nuclear reactor will be with an SMR. So I'll tell you fact and fiction. When you look at most nuclear reactor designers today, they put a very beautiful building for their reactors. And in Chinese, they said that we'll call it baloney. It's not going to happen, because most of them will end up burying their reactor. It's not going to be in these fanciful buildings, which, what does that do? It actually makes it very difficult for a bad actor to come in and do whatever they want. It's very difficult. Now, two, remember I told you about Chernobyl, mostly men, so I would like to say men and women, it's all men that I knew of, that went into the reactor on fire and stopped everything. Well, they all died. Why? Because you can't go too far after you go into a reactor building and you don't know what you're doing. So if you're stealing anything, you're probably going to be stealing radioactive material. That's really what's most precious there. Well, then you won't go far. You won't go far. And so unless they put a money vault in there, it's just not going to happen. So.
You can keep, on this topic, but we want to make sure we answer as many of your questions as possible.
So the next one is more environmental. How will a nuclear plant impact our water resources and the quality of our water?
That's a great question, because
Living right next to a natural gas plant, you may have heard about tritium discharges. And there was a reason why, when they passed a law on making sure Indian Point does not discharge tritium into the water, they had to specify tritium and not radioactive material. Anyone guess why? Because we do it every single day from all these other plants. So you may have tritium, which is basically water, ultimately, that was slightly activated. That was coming from if you have a boiling water reactor, it comes from the reactor island itself when it goes to the steam generator. But the water that I was living right next to, and the reason why it was smelling so bad is that you had a lot more contaminants in there. You had lead, you had polonium, you had radium, which is what killed Mary Curie, actually. And so when it comes to the water, the NRC is very stringent on how we actually treat that. And the EPA actually has more laxist terms. And I think every single plant, even manufacturing facilities for solar panels and others, need to be on the same level of regulation as nuclear power plants. Because I think that's only when our water is going to be much cleaner.
So I told you that the reactors will be buried in ground. Most of the SMRs people do that. And when they take it and they drop it in a hole in the ground, that hole actually is lined with two things, cement and stainless steel. So if something went wrong with the reactor, it's not going to go anywhere. Plus, those reactors we're talking about, they do not need to be near water. They have water coolant in them, and at the bottom of this, like imagine this is the borehole. At the bottom, there's probably water up to this point. The reactor is dropped into half of that water in there. And there is zero need to put the SMR, well, actually it could be the same thing for a big reactor, so there's no need to put the reactor near water. It's absolutely zero. If anybody tells you they need water, they don't know what they're talking about. It's not necessary. And so tritium, let me just explain to the public. Does anyone, raise your hand, do you know what tritium is? Okay, there's a couple people. So let me tell you what tritium is. You and I drink water, H2O. Hydrogen has one proton in it. That's the natural hydrogen that we see almost everywhere. Then there is an isotope for hydrogen. It's called deuterium for two. One proton, one neutron. Now it's in the nucleus. So there are two things. And then the third one, the one that we are all worried about, is tritium. Tritium has two neutrons in it and one proton. And the body, if we drink it, doesn't know the difference. Sees it as water. And it goes all over the body and so on. And then 10 days later, if you don't keep drinking it, it leaves the body too. And so the damage from it is not as bad as advertised. I advise you to have zero of it. But if that's what happens, it's not the end of the world. So that's what tritium is. And it's not a natural product. Deuterium, the one I talked about with one proton, one neutron, is in the oceans. It's a natural product in the ocean. Tritium is born in nuclear reactors. It doesn't exist anywhere else. So.
The other thing to recognize too is that with any form of radiation, it's going to depend on the energy levels of that. Tritium is a low-level beta emitter, right? Right. And it's going to depend on the concentration, right? So when we're talking about releases of tritium at Indian Point, for example, it's diluted to the point where it's actually not a hazard, okay? It's interesting because the folks that were insisting on passing a bill to prevent tritium from being released into the Hudson basically didn't have a case from a scientific standpoint. If you look at the language of the bill, it's kind of peculiar, but it states that there shall not be a release because of the potential economic impacts of fear created by the possibility of tritium being released into the environment. It had been happening for decades. Indian Point had very small, tiny amounts of tritium releases, like other nuclear power plants do as well. So, you know, I don't think the legislation has had much merit. We'll see how it goes. But go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, the Canadian plants actually discharge treated water north of us right now, right? It makes us...
And it's coming our way. So that's why they have to specify the Hudson River.
So the next question is, within the construction and operation of this new generation nuclear plant and the necessary additional transmission lines, what level of state or municipal government will be held liable and accountable financially and possibly criminally if there's an accident or damage to personal property from normal operation or due to losses in the tourism or agriculture economy?
Does that person work for the NRC? That's exactly what they ask us. That's exactly everything that you need to stipulate before building anything. In fact, you need to clear those before you even submit your construction permit application. So that's a great question, but that's already done.
You are not licensed to operate, they'll do anything with the reactor before having an answer to that question. So it's part of the existence of that reactor that these points are already resolved.
Next one is, how can we best use the energy byproducts of a nuclear facility in the North Country to enhance our local economy?
So if we're speaking about byproducts, we speak about spent nuclear fuel. I mean, you saw a prime example there. I think in New York we have approximately several thousands tons worth of spent nuclear fuel, maybe in the 5,000 to 6,000 tons. We have 90,000 tons in the United States. I can get those numbers for you. We mostly operate in the southeast, so we've been mostly focused on actually recycling spent nuclear fuel in the southeast. So we're building our first site at the Savannah River site in South Carolina. But again, can get those numbers for New York. But just to give you a sense, it's roughly 176,000 a ton of uranium. And so if you take the 5,000 tons, it's very easy to make the calculation of how much money that could generate and how much uranium we don't need to necessarily mine to put in our reactors. In fact, we can circularize that fuel into today's reactors in New York.
Thank you. And more of a general question here. Has there been any more progress with thorium-based reactors? Any chance we could test one in the North Country?
So the first time I created a nuclear reactor company was called Thorium Unlimited. and the reason is because I was so convinced that the thorium was less radioactive than the uranium, and that it was 4 times more abundant. And what I realized is I was actually very passionate about molten salt reactors, which is basically a liquefied fuel that is cooled by, basically you have the fuel that's liquefied in the coolant in a molten salt bath. So you basically take these rods that we showed and you shave them like cheese inside that soup of molten salt, and you have basically a tea kettle. But I think those are definitely reactors that are going to come online later, just because you need to qualify the fuel, right? So even if we think that thorium and possibly plutonium is better, you have to go through a 15 to 20 year fuel qualification process. So again, the regulator is very insistent on making sure that before any type of fuel is put in a reactor, you have to irradiate it for longer than it would ever be in it.
So thorium is fun for nuclear engineers, really a lot of fun. But thorium is like, we look at uranium-235, that's the main material we use for fission in PWR reactors. Thorium is 232. And when you put it in a radiation field, it becomes 233, but it's not thorium anymore, it becomes uranium-233. And somebody in the government told somebody in the government that this materials can be used also for other illicit purposes. So DOE does not like thorium. That's why you don't see anything with thorium. It's really, that's a technical reason why. And another benefit Carl didn't mention is that there are 4 times, it's a factor of 4 abundance of thorium relative to the uranium. But again, the issue is political more than anything. It will make great reactors. It's a little bit more complex engineering to do it, but we know how to do it. So, but we're not going to be doing any thorium anytime soon.
some of these reactors are fast reactors, which means that they can actually consume the plutonium, the minor actinides, which allows us to be able to use way more fuel, or at least way less fuel, produce more power. So for example, if we take all the nuclear waste in the United States and we recycle it and we put it in the light water reactors, we have roughly 150 years worth of power without mining a single gram of uranium from the ground. If we use advanced reactors, Gen 4 reactors that operate in a fast spectrum, and again, we can take as much time to discuss that, you're talking about basically able to run on the nuclear waste today ad infinitum, because then you could breed fuel. So again, we won't go too technical, but that just goes to show that if we start using plutonium and other materials in our fuels and are authorized to do that, we can actually get way more power out of less material.
Thanks. I have another question for you, Greg. And I see, it looks as I scroll down, maybe about 15 more questions, which obviously we can't do that, but I just wanted to assure all of you who have either handed it to Andy and Larry or used the app and sent it to Andy and Larry, and they're sharing with me through the cloud. At least one of the gentlemen up here will answer directly each one of your emails, if you don't get a chance to go, as Carl said, and see him after. So Greg, the question is, in addition to pipe fitters, how do millwrights, tradesmen play a role in nuclear jobs, and how many jobs are we talking about here?
So the question was, how many millwrights does it take
To build a nuclear reactor?
Says play a role in nuclear jobs.
I am going to read an assisted answer here that Keith was very quick to put up. You know, upstate New York nuclear plants, you know, from a financial impact. With the 2,100 direct jobs at 3 upstate nuclear facilities, 3,000 jobs for supplemental outage refueling contractors. That's the bucket that we live in as the contractors once the plants are up and running, and that after the initial build. But yeah, so millwrights, without having the scope of what a millwright does, basically they work in tandem with all of the other trades, and anything that is being conveyed, set, or critical path for a process flow to keep moving, and that they do have a critical role, as do the electricians, the pipe fitters, and everybody else, because in a team concept on any construction project, you have to work in tandem with each other, otherwise you become very unsafe, and it elevates your risk. So yes, there are millwright roles in a lot of the facilities. Alignment of pumps, there's various roles for a millwright specific.
One of the other statistics there is that in terms of direct and indirect jobs, you know, the other businesses that are created economically within a region, it's like 25,000 direct and indirect jobs that comes from our upstate plants today. So it'd be beautiful if North Country could tap into that.
Two more quick questions. One of them I would presume for you will be quick, but folks have asked, could you please explain passive cooling?
So when you look at a nuclear reactor, actually, traditionally, it was all done based on pumps. Just water comes through the pump, you push it, and it goes through it. There is another way, you all know it. When you heat up a kettle, you could see it boiling. That's because the water that is getting any heat into it, it becomes less dense, so it rises to the top of the kettle. So we call that natural circulation inside a nuclear reactor. So if something went wrong with the pumps, natural circulation will force the hot water that's still sitting in the reactor that's still producing heat or some heat, because if it's designed right, it should down. Actually, they have to be designed like this by NRC rules. It will shut down itself and the water continues to circulate. That's passive, meaning you don't need any auxiliary power to force that circulation. And again, if you notice, go make tea tonight, you'll see it.
I was going to say,
You
Lisa,
said refer to a couple morons bombs in the past, and in fact, every single time there was a nuclear incident, the real instructions were do nothing. And it's the operators that panicked, that decided to turn on diesel generators, that had cables that were underneath, Fukushima and completely immersed in water that created the spark that ignited the hydrogen explosion at Fukushima. So just for everyone to know, what happened at Fukushima was not a nuclear explosion. It was a chemical reaction where you had hydrogen gas explode and spread melted fuel all around. But for example, my co-founder in Exodus was at Fukushima the following day, right? If it was a nuclear explosion, there would be no more Fukushima. There would be no Unit 2 and 3 buildings that's standing there. So again, it's very different from the mushroom cloud that you see. It's purely a water reaction that spreads radioactive material when you have these.
Even the word meltdown is something that's not well understood by I think, a lot of folks. When you have a meltdown, a lot of people assume that's an unlimited chain reaction out of control. That's not what has happened. When you have a meltdown, if the water boils off on fuel, the fuel is the moderator. Without the water, the reaction stops. Now there is residual heat that's left, and that can melt the assembly, okay? And that's something that needs to be dealt with. The great thing about some of the newer designs is that the designs are able to effectively dissipate heat, so you don't have a meltdown type of situation. And there are a lot of different designs, and they approach it in different ways. But tell me if I'm wrong. I think that's correct.
I'm definitely getting in trouble by my staff for saying this, but to be very transparent, we're actually working on separating the nuclear fuel that melted in the concrete at Fukushima from the concrete to be able to reuse it in reactors. So that just gives you a sense of what type of stuff you can do with some good chemistry.
And our last question, I believe, is what would each of you, or whomever would like to take this, identify what you believe is the biggest negative factor in hosting a nuclear reactor facility?
I would say not knowing what it is. Again, information is power, and I believe that the most negative thing of nuclear is its bad press, and it's the fact that it hasn't communicated with the industry. It's kind of this obscure, it's kind of why my family was so anti-nuclear. It's because it was this institutional, it was owned by the French government, managed by the French government. There was no transparency. Every single time they had questions, they would not address them and look away. And I think that the most negative thing is nuclear industry does not do justice to itself in being more transparent and communicative. That's what I would say is the negative piece.
The most dangerous nuclear reactor is the one that you don't build. Because when you don't build it, it means you're going to be burning more fossil fuels, which is going to result in more deaths, more harm to people, more damage to public health.
I would actually touch on kind of what Carl answered, the lack of information or the lack of communication about the processes, the plant, the operators, the location, and that, because the more that it is discussed, as you can see, hopefully you can see that tonight, it's actually more of a commonplace. So yes, there are a lot of folks in our region that if I proposed a new anything, the answer is no, and then you have to spend your whole life trying to convince ourselves why the answer could be yes. So, the no first, and then prove it to me why it should be yes, and anywhere USA is one of the largest barriers without having these conversations.
There's nothing really dangerous about nuclear reactors. Here's where the danger is to believe that you cannot do the next better thing, not best thing, the next better thing. Well, I'm going to tell you a story. I forgot his last name, but his first name was Brian. The year, I believe, was 1898, and this brilliant man was the head of the United States Patent Bureau. The head of the Patent Bureau, he noticed that there's a lot of technology around him. It was really the end of the first technological century. Here's what he said. Everything that can be invented has been invented. The rest is details. And he was the head of the United States Patent Bureau. So I was the head of the patent application process at the Idaho National Laboratory. And every week when we met, I saw things I've never heard of. So why am I telling the story? Fortunately for all of us here, science is always on the move, and we need to be paying attention. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to all of you. And thanks to everyone here, and I would say that it sounds like there's the opportunity to ask further questions with the four gentlemen as we leave. And I want to remind you all that tomorrow evening, Kelly, I don't know if you're where I can see you, is at 5:30. Correct me if I'm wrong, 5:30 at the Student Center in Potsdam. Tomorrow afternoon, a similar event will be held. Thank you very much for coming.